Welcome, everybody. This is Michael Crossfox speaking from the Division of Library and Information Science, Satellite Campus, my living room. Welcome, everyone, to today's conversation. We're going to be hearing from archivists and records managers about their response to the current COVID-19 pandemic. I titled this slideshow Addressing the Backlog because I think that's going to be a theme that we see during the course of this conversation. So who's party to this conversation? Well, we're going to hear from Dermot Cooper, who's the University Records Manager at St. John's University, Elise Hennig, who's our Interim University Archivist, also at St. John's, Christina Orozco and Michelle Levy, who are Assistant Archivists for the Paulist Fathers, based in Washington, D.C., and I believe New York. Also, is that correct, Christina? Are you guys...
They moved the archive to New York about, Michelle, what, 2016?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, excellent. And finally, Kyle Brinster, who is an archival studies intern in DLIS, and he was working at Seton Hall University Archives. He didn't submit a headshot to me, so I improvised, and I'm using the world's landlord, Nook, from the famous massive online game, Animal Crossing.
It's a better photo.
All right, so before the flood, what were your projects and workflows? What were you working on right before the flood, Christina? I call it before the flood, but obviously before the shutdown, excuse me. Before the shutdown.
Well, Michelle and I had a couple of things going on. We had arranged a work trip to Rome with our supervisor, Father Foley. One of the Paulist parishes there had a lot of archival material. They wanted us to consult on. We were going to do oral histories with parishioners who'd been there for decades. We had meetings set up with like cardinals and the Redemptorist archive. Obviously that didn't happen. We also had an in-house exhibit. We had the move we were still kind of dealing with, because even though they moved from DC in 2016, we were in a space that wasn't suitable in the building for the archive, so we had to move internally again pretty recently, and then we were just doing the regular references and kind of internal, external reference requests and things like that.
And what does your archive collect? What's your collection look like? Is it executive internal communications, or do you actually have kind of parish artifacts?
We run the gamut. We run from relics to paintings to soil, which I still haven't gotten a straight answer on whether or not it's a relic, so I'm still calling it soil. We have plaster like casts, so 3D objects. We have audio visual, we have documents, we have Bibles, and then we have institutional records. Michelle, am I missing anything?
We also have like foundation stuff, like stuff that the other parishes send us. So we do have like kind of parish participation as well. And then also the individual fathers sometimes send it to us while they're still alive, and then sometimes after that.
So your archive is both cultural and institutional.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so the university setup, Dermot is our records manager, and so that's institutional documentation. Is that correct, Dermot?
Well, yes, I think we could use that description, except that unlike from what I've been hearing from the other meetings, constituents, I am actually getting some kind of feedback.
Hold on just a moment. I'm going to mute somebody who just came into the room with their microphone on. All right, go ahead, say that again, Dermot.
Yes, as I was saying that the constituents that I serve really happens to be the university staff. Unlike what I've been hearing before, where you all do other librarians deal with outsiders, you know. And I have been working on projects that I remember when we started to talk about being involved in this, I mentioned that when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. So as serious as this crisis is, I have seen the upside to it by being involved in projects that I would not have normally, gotten the chance to do. Because we have over 15,000 boxes of records in storage. And I am only now getting the opportunity to examine what these boxes really contain to make decisions as to how long we should keep, what we should destroy, and even discover who are the new owners of these records, you know?
Excellent. And we'll talk more about that in just a few moments. Let's bounce over to Elise now. What was the university archive working on before the shutdown?
Not hearing.
Oh, we can't hear you, Elise. No audio, Elise. Just make sure that you're connected to the to your computer for audio, or make sure that your device is lined up. You can go ahead and work on that. I'll move over to Kyle, who was an intern at Seton Hall University Archives. What were you working on before, Kyle?
That's right. I was working. My internship was with the technical archivist at Seton Hall, and so I was working with their audiovisual collections. So first, I was doing surveying and item level inventory just to see what they really had. It was kind of a mess. And then the ultimate goal for me, you know, as a student, was to have some sort of complete project entity. So by the end of my time there, I was working on processing a small collection that they had from a former instructor. So that was where I left off. Was mid surveying.
Okay. Elise, are you able to join us?
Is this audio better?
Yes.
Yes, it's something.
So we were primarily working on projects the 150th anniversary of St. John's, which is approaching in September. So mostly university archives related, but we also have special collections materials, which is artwork, artifacts, anything like that, rare books.
So you were assembling essentially what was going to be an exhibit for the sesquicentennial anniversary of the university.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's flip into what our workflows were regarding breaking down or closing down, rather. So, Elise, how were you able to prepare, and how long did it take you to prepare for working remotely, or if that's even an option for you? What was your contingency as archivist?
As soon as we started hearing about the possibility of working remotely for an extended period of time, I started scanning. We do have a lot of digital material, but there were certain things that I knew we would need. And it could never be enough scanning, but I spent that final week scanning on site as much as I could all day, and making sure that my team members had the technology that they needed and enough work to do remotely. So, of course, it's difficult to do all of our work without our physical collections, but since we do have a fair amount of digital material, there's a lot of research that we can do, backlog on digitized audio, video, all sorts of projects that we can work on. So we can stay very busy for a while.
Right. And now with the Paulists, how were you able to manage? What did you grab before you left the office, Michelle and Christina?
Well, like Elise, we did a lot of scanning beforehand. We kind of scanned a lot of correspondence and transcript to transcribe and to like make CR them, because at first we weren't sure if we'll have access to our work computers. Like shortly before everything shut down, we actually managed. The IT suggested a program called AnyDesk, which lets us log into the computer and like access the server and like some more of our backlog. But again, like kind of, so we have stuff to do, but it's not like the entire collection, so we can't. There's some reference requests we can do because it's already we already have it digitized, but a lot of them is only in the physical collection. We also kind of just we're prioritizing more to digital work as well right before the shutdown, and kind of close up as much as we can before that.
We'll talk more about what you're doing now on the next slide. But Dermot, what was your contingency plan?
Actually, I was forced to go to the dictionary to see if there was a difference between being ready and being prepared. I
Okay.
have been working from home as long as I have been working at St. John's University. These 19 of the 21 years, I am equipped to work from home. So I was thinking that I am prepared. But when this thing happened, I realized that I was not ready because I still have documents in the office that I would have liked to have had here to continue doing some of what I, was doing on the computer. But my approach being what I would like to describe as hybrid because of the shredding program. There are days that I have to be on campus, away from the desk. And then there are days when I have to be sitting at the computer for many hours. So I think I was prepared, but not ready for this.
That's a very clever way of thinking about this. Now, Kyle, you were not in a position to make decisions at Seton Hall, but what did you get? Did you get a sense? Were they prepared?
I mean, not particularly. I think, as an archives, a lot of the work obviously occurs in location. So I think they, it was kind of a slow burn in terms of, they were little drips of information that they were hearing they might close down. So I think similarly, they were making plans, scanning stuff, trying to find projects that could be worked on for the long term. So for me, I think they didn't have a full system in place for sure, but they had elements of the backlog that they could address from home.
Good. Well, it's important that everybody have something to do while we're working remotely. You mentioned, Michelle, that you were fielding maybe some reference questions that couldn't be answered because you don't have access to the collection. Are you keeping track of those questions? Are you logging the responses?
Yeah, so we told them that it's going to basically have to wait until we get back to the office. For the most part, they're understanding about that. And we kind of just keeping track, like writing down which ones we have to do as soon as we get back to the office. But for the most part, we haven't really been getting more requests ever since everything officially shut down. Because I think they're starting to realize that even if they did ask, it wouldn't be able to be answered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes we do get a few internal requests, but those are kind of for more information that we would have on hand, and they kind of know that it was like already digital.
Mm-hmm.
That's clear. So your users were kind of, you don't have to worry about, for instance, other public libraries now are facing the challenge of not only engaging with their existing users, but now they're finding new users, and a lot of them have made adjustments to the eligibility for patron status in their database. So it's an interesting conundrum that we find ourselves in. Elise, now you manage a staff. What does the work from home situation look like for your staff, your department?
So there are 3 staff members and 1 graduate assistant. So the work that they're doing right now is primarily historical research with our digitized materials, transcribing, indexing, working on content for social media posts, and addressing our backlog. One thing in particular is we keep a database of research requests, but it's very hard to make sure that they're all entered into our database because of how many there are. So this is a good time to go back, see if there were any questions left unanswered, anything that we can enter into the database, and then pull some statistics from that once it's ready. So there is a lot of work to do still. And one of the projects that will probably be coming up is documenting the experience of our campus community during this pandemic. So we've been talking with some people from the public history program and elsewhere on campus about recording oral histories and figuring out how we can capture this moment in time.
Yeah, that's something that I'm also hearing from public libraries, that this is now going to be the year of the microhistory, and everyone is scrambling to put together oral history programs and engage with their public. And I know one thing that's kind of interesting is the emergence of video collections. People want, I know a few libraries on Long Island that are putting out calls for patrons to submit 15-second or 30-second video clips of their day-to-day life during this time, and they upload them or they email them to a central address, and then that's going to be edited together into a weekly social media post. So they'll put together a 2 or 3 minute video that will go on Instagram or Facebook, and that drums up more engagement, but it also, I think, helps connect people that are in isolation. Dermot, what are you working on? You said you've got 15,000 zillion boxes of documents. Are you, they're not in your home, but you know where they are and you're just refreshing. What are you doing?
My home could fit in the 15,000 boxes. No, but anyway, since we've been doing it, we have had 2 VSOs, and for those who don't know what that is, it's voluntary separation offers, where people retired, and they were the owners, so to speak, of the records that were sent to storage, many of them. So I am now forced to identify who, as I said, are the new owners. And our new dean, when she came on board, she realized that the university too was also not in compliance, in that we were keeping records that were way past their useful and legal life. So I am now in the process of trying to not grow the collection anymore, but to reuse boxes that are in excellent condition. And this is where the crisis sort of like put a spoke in our wheel there, because I was bringing back boxes, as I said, in good condition, reusing those and taking the contents of those boxes and putting them into bin. But clearly that cannot take place for the time being, but there is still a volume that took place, I should say a quantity of boxes that I am yet to identify who these owners are, to see if I can get them to respond to whether we should destroy or keep, and to give us the rationale for keeping these boxes, because some people just wanted to err on the side of keeping. But we can't keep everything, and especially with the cost increasing to store records. But this is literally an ongoing project. My goal was to bring this down to a manageable 10,000 boxes. And I am about, I would say, about a couple hundred short of the goal. But to get to the goal would have entailed really being on campus to make some visitations, you know.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because these are people, you're looking for the inheritor of these archived
Correct.
documents, and that's someone who is working in a job at the university that is doing that job without having ever seen these documents. So yeah, it's curious, what is the case for keeping these documents if operations can proceed without ever referring to these documents? So that's an interesting quandary. I've never thought of what it takes to hand off, especially in a kind of corporate archive setting or an institutional setting. What's the value of saving these things if they're just never going to be accessed, never going to be referenced, and could they just be stored digitally, even locally on a server on campus or in the cloud? It's an interesting time.
I believe it's only today it came across my mind. I was speaking to someone from the General Counsel's office today too, and I was telling her that I was considering using this period to look at records that are permanent and to see if we can get those digitized and get rid of the actual physical records. One of the other things too that I was thinking that we can offer the university is to have Iron Mountain go into the boxes, which is something we never ever wanted to encourage. But to identify what records those who are able to work from home may need, scan forward. That clearly is a cost that it is not my decision to make, but it is one of the ways to continue giving the university service for those who are requesting records, because we can't be on site. The truck cannot come to deliver physically. And we have never really had a file arrangement. It was always a box arrangement. So clearly Iron Mountain does offer the service of being able to scan and forward. So, as I said, that's
Oh,
even
I didn't know they offer document delivery. That's good to know.
yeah, but I mean, it's way above the cost of delivering a box and things like that. But in the interest of continuing to give people the material that they need to work, it is something that we could probably examine.
Right. Kyle, what are you working on now? Are you able to continue or work on the projects that you had started at Seton Hall? Have you made any progress, or are you just on pause?
Yes and no. I mean, mostly on pause in terms of the projects I originally started. The main thing, was getting kind of running theme has been difficulty in access for me and permissions as an intern. I don't have Seton Hall credentials. I don't have an email address there. So accessing stuff like archive space took a long time, and especially when met with their technical team obviously was inundated quite heavily in the first week or so afterwards. So a lot of it was similar to, I think, what Elise said, social media kind of stuff, creating potential blog posts and other content that they can kind of juice in this downtime. As far as my projects went, some of it was merging. I created records for these AV collections, and it was merging the records with the existing ones in there. So I was able to work on that aspect a little bit. But since then, I have been able to do work. It's been more in the area of adding subject headings, going through and adding more detail to some of these records. The goal of Seton Hall is to kind of take this opportunity to develop their finding aids. They were created originally like 10 years ago almost, so they're not, and I think they were kind of a rush job. So going back and making them more improved is the overall mission. So adding to that is I'm trying to work behind the scenes to help with that.
So even though the this internship site is closed, you are working in partnership with your supervisor to produce a document or produce a finding that can be used to quantify your time in the internship.
Correct. I mean, I'm working adjacent, I would say, to the finding aids. I'm doing research on the collections in question. I'm helping with the metadata part of it, but yes, and then hopefully at the end of this we will be able to point to the deliverable of having a complete finding aid.
Excellent. And speaking of work from home, what do you find? I know that you, Kyle, you just said that you have a login, an identity with Seton Hall systems. So that's part of the digital divide, right? If the work is predicated on being on campus, now you can't do that work. So what else, has anyone else encountered the realities of the digital divide? Maybe this is something that Elise could speak to because you actually manage staff.
It's been interesting. Not everyone, we found throughout the library, but even within our department in the archives, not everyone has access to all of the technology that they would need to work from home. So there was a little bit of scrambling to figure that out. But at this point, everyone at least has enough to do some work. But there's also different comfort levels with the technology and software. So PC versus Mac, comfort with OneDrive, which only the university has started promoting more recently, as well as other tools like Google Drive and WebEx and other software like that. So there's been a bit of IT support from my end, making sure that everyone on my team can communicate and get their work done.
It's come up on every webinar. That's why I include this slide here, because every type of librarian has had to deal with this over the last few weeks. I would imagine that for the Paulist fathers, the transition might be a little bit jarring.
Yeah, it was because it affected the Rome parish first, and they really needed to know how to connect with their parishioners from a digital distance. And the fathers are slow to trust web-based technologies like clouds and online servers. And so they really had to do a complete 180. And now they increase their social media presence across the board. They are doing live stream masses every day. The masses in just New York, 3 times a day. And then the other parishes across the country and in Rome, again, are doing the same thing, but they don't have the infrastructure to support that, or sometimes the technical know-how to do that. So sometimes they are relying on their novices who are younger and more tech savvy to kind of edit mass videos and repost them, or set up like consulting by the phone or by video, like consulting with them to how to set up the cameras, or how do we do this. A lot of what they're facing now is, how do we live stream a mass? And if they live stream it on Facebook, how do they keep it? And so we were literally told by the president, Michelle and I, like, oh, I know you need to keep the masses. You know how to get it off of YouTube? And so we have to figure that out. We have to figure out the storage, the metadata for it, and how to track which fathers have social media, which ones are just starting, especially when we can't talk to all 100 plus fathers and be IT for them, because the IT, there's no central IT. Everybody in every state has their own IT if they have IT. So it's a bit of a learning experience for them. It's a learning curve. But they're trying. They are trying. So it's, at least they're trying to adapt, and they're seeing the benefit of the technology. But at times it is a handicap for them, that prior to the pandemic, they weren't big on a lot of modern technology.
Another trend in this pandemic is staff training up the technologies, and I've seen a lot of webinars being advertised, tech-specific webinars. A lot of the vendors have stepped up, and they're providing their tutorials to broader markets. So it's interesting, because I think as a society, we're all kind of going through this at the same time, and everyone's finding their own solutions. But the idea that tech can be a panacea to take care of everything is not necessarily true. And we, because we're in IT adjacent fields, so we know that there may not be a technological solution for every problem. And I'm hearing from librarians on the ground and other archivists that same idea of telephone reference, like take a step back from digital technology to, a telephone technology. So that's just kind of the baseline. You can answer telephone reference questions and do provide telephone services. So that's one workaround that I'm hearing pretty broadly from different libraries around the area. So speaking of, what are the lessons that we've learned? Dermot, is that you're going to take back to your institution when we reopen, and in terms of a workflow or any efficiencies that you might identify now that you can implement once you're able to get back on campus?
That was one of the questions that just kept going around in my mind. And I don't want to sound arrogant, but what can I learn again, especially as it comes working remotely? As I said, records management happens to be a sort of hybrid function. There's a lot to do on the computer, and there is a lot to do face to face. I think what I can say is that I should probably become better organized, so that in the event that something happens again, which they foresee, I will be better prepared to deal with it. The advent of the new computers that we got and using one cloud has been a tremendous value.
Go
ahead.
No, a couple days after the campus closed, I was able to go into my office, and I got permission from the provost to go to my office, and I was able to, essentially, I dumped my desktop computer onto OneDrive,
Yep.
and that's it. I mean, I'm still kind of pulling through documents there, but I was able to get what I needed. cloud. And it's great that we had that license and that everyone is becoming familiar with it. I think a lot of us are going to integrate it into our workflows. Elise, you had mentioned that is first off, I'm hoping that I'm assuming that you're working toward your fulfilling your original putting together an exhibition for the anniversary. Is that still the focus of what you're working on during this time?
At the very least, we'll have a digital exhibit. I'm not sure what's going to happen with a physical exhibit, depending on when the campus is able to reopen. But we're still doing the research and answering a lot of questions related to St. John's history. We are still getting reference questions, so that is still in progress.
And Michelle and Christina, anything that you've learned or picked up? I'm sure your constituents, your patrons, your users are going to have new habits when you get back into the office.
Yeah, a lot of what we want to go back and discuss with the fathers is infrastructure. They need a digital infrastructure. And for those who don't know why I emphasize that so much, to put that in perspective, the fathers literally had a patchwork of Wi-Fi. So there were like more than 10 different routers just to have Wi-Fi going in the building, and we would have total Wi-Fi blackouts, no internet at all. This was just last year. Yeah. Towards like the middle end of last year, they finally got like a network, reliable Wi-Fi. And so now that they are relying so heavily on streaming and internet connection, we are going to really advocate for the infrastructure to support all that they have started to continue archiving it, web archiving, and cloud-based storage for certain things, because they still don't trust it. But to start, baby steps. We have to walk them through like small steps, because again, it's the whole, they are used to a different time. A lot of the fathers are older. And so there's always that hesitation with new technology. Well, how long will it last? And that sort of thing. So we have to find cost-effective, reliable, sustainable technology we can propose to them for this digital infrastructure that they are going to need.
Absolutely. So you're going to drag them kicking and screaming into the 20th century.
Hopefully.
Another thing is that we had a physical exhibit that we were originally planning right before this all happened. Yeah. And we kind of, in the hassle, along with the stuff we were preparing for us to work on, we also digitized some extra stuff that we thought might work for an exhibit and kind of retransform that to a digital timeline exhibit. And so maybe going forward, we can also kind of, like, in addition to whatever physical exhibits we do, kind of prioritize making a snapshot of it online.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Now, Kyle, you were already in an online program. Just maybe personally, you don't have to answer this question, but I have found myself in the position of answering lots of questions from people who suddenly find themselves in an online educational environment. Is that the case for you? Are you giving advice to maybe friends and family members that are now suddenly in an online program?
I mean, I would, take my words with a grain of salt, but no, like my wife is working remotely now, and I think, it's more, in my mind, it's more strategies, mental health related, and work organization wise suggestions. But I think a lot of people, I'm surprised by how quickly, just in conversation, people have adapted more or less to this new, workflow relatively quickly. I mean, as you pointed out, I live most of my, work is done remotely, either research or, schoolwork and stuff. And I think, many people were quick learn in that regard.
Yeah, it's it's a little overwhelming, but I think we've done a good job. We're fortunate enough to have resources available to us. We already passed over with the conversation about the digital divide. Uh, I think it's more of an institute to staff problem when we talk about archives and records management. Uh, as Dermot said, he'd already been working from home. I'm sure he's already streamlined his workflows and optimized them. I have experience. I've worked from all around the country, having to attend American Library, Library Association conferences uh, as a recruitment effort on the part of the department. So I've already had this experience, and I know that Michelle and Christina traveled a lot with the Paulists, so you've also had this similar experience. We're very fortunate to be in the space we're in,
Yes.
and it's clear. I mean, there are a lot of libraries that are confronted with the reality. I know someone who works as a part-time clerk at a library in Nassau County, and she's been driving to the library and sitting outside of the branch to use their Wi-Fi because she doesn't have Wi-Fi at home, and she wants to contribute to the institution while she's working. She wants to work from home essentially, but she can't, so she's using Wi-Fi where she can find it. And I think that as time goes on and more public points of access to Wi-Fi start closing, I think the decision by Starbucks corporate to keep their stores open is probably saving the primary and secondary education market or industries because that's a point of contact. That's a Wi-Fi hotspot that a lot of people have access to. And the ubiquity of Starbucks, there's one in every neighborhood. So people can drive there or walk there and use their Wi-Fi. And I think that's an important service that they're accidentally providing in support of education across the country. So if anyone has any questions, now's the time to drop them into chat. You open the chat by scrolling down to the lower middle of your screen, and the chat button is the third from the right. It's the little cartoon speech bubble. And I'll just remind everyone of who's here. So if you have a particular question that you want to ask, Tom Nook, why don't I have any peaches on my island?
Not my fault.
Well, I guess I took care of everything so thoroughly that no one has any questions. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us today. Our speakers, very important that you get your stories out. I'm looking forward to what you're going to produce after this. I hope that you can share it with the DLIS community in terms of what exhibits you've come up with and what ideas. There was talk, I think, this week I got an email from some alumni who are interested in having follow-up panels, maybe in June or July. So I'll definitely keep that in mind. Dr. Vorbach sends his thanks via chat. And thank you, folks. Thank you, Dermot. Thank you, Elise, Christina, Kyle, and Michelle. Now I'm just going to slip into DLIS Academic Support Assistant. Here's some housekeeping. So this webinar series, Let's Talk, continues until the end of April. We're going to hear next week, next Tuesday, from our Advanced Certificate in Management for Information Professionals, faculty, and alumni about crisis management. Then I'm going to be joined by a very special guest to have a talk next Thursday about coping and well-being during this time. Followed next week, the week after, sorry, the 21st, we're going to hear from some members of Brooklyn Public Library about provision of library services to older adults, remotely, obviously. And then we're going to hear about library services in support of special education for primary and secondary school students on April 23rd. And then, unfortunately, the panel that I had assembled on remote reference for April 28th has backed out. It was a Connecticut library group. So I'm finding a replacement for them, and we'll hear about whatever that subject is on the 28th. And finally, the series concludes with our last regularly scheduled DELISA webinar, which is going to be our Directors Forum, and we're going to spend some time hearing from Dr. Vorbach. Other additional information, online graduate registration is open right now, so if you're a DLIS student, please go ahead and prepare to register. And if you're in your final semester and you've completed all of your coursework, the DLIS e-portfolio for a May 2020 degree is due Wednesday, April 15th. Thanks again, folks. Thank you all for joining us, and the recording will be posted to our YouTube channel. Have a blessed Passover and a happy Easter, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.